Similar to our last video, in this video, I want to think about how our understandings and assumptions about individual rational behavior and thought inform our understanding of how societies and collective groups of individuals make decisions in response to scarcity. Now, because the motivation for this video is so similar to the previous video, I think of the value of this video as being similar to the value of the previous set of videos. So I'm not going to go over why you need to know this in any more detail than what we have already considered in the previous video. Now, what we are first going to consider when we think about the rational rule as applied to societal economic behavior is the production possibilities frontier. Now, this figure of the PPF should look similar to a budget constraint, except for two differences to be discussed on the following slide. The production possibilities frontier shows how a producer, whether that is a single individual who is manufacturing a product and selling it at a market, a company, or an entire country, can produce different combinations of outputs. In this example, a country can either produce healthcare or education. But there are two key differences between the budget constraint and the PPF. First, this PPF is hypothetical, and it is difficult to quantify a hypothetical national stock of resources which could be used to produce similarly quantifiable or measurable accounts of education and healthcare. We will look at examples later in this class where we can assume or suppose specific values for the PPF, but in this example is unitless. Secondly, while the slope of a budget constraint is a straight line when prices are constant, which is what we often assume, the slope of a PPF may be curved outward to reflect the law of diminishing marginal returns, which is discussed on the following slide. It may also be straight, as a budget constraint is, but when we assume the law of diminishing marginal returns, it is going to be curved outward. In either case, curved or straight, and for either curve, a budget constraint or a PPF, the slope of the curve is the opportunity cost of consumption or production. For example, the slope on the budget constraint on the previous video allowed us to find what the opportunity cost of one burger or one bus ticket was. That slope was constant in that example. In this case, the slope of the production possibilities frontier, PPF, is not constant. So from point A to point B, the slope is relatively flat, and the opportunity cost of producing one more unit of education is relatively low, while the opportunity cost of producing one more unit of healthcare is relatively high. You give up a lot of education to produce the last unit of healthcare. This relationship is reversed from going to point D to point F, where you give up a lot of healthcare to get that last unit of education, and that is the opportunity cost of that last unit of education. Lastly, just as it is the goal for a consumer to make rational, smart decisions based on their budget, the prices they face, and their preferences, it is the goal of a producer to make efficient production decisions. There are two types of production efficiency which the producer should be aware: productive efficiency and allocative efficiency. Productive efficiency just means that you are not wasting your resources, that given your inputs, you could not be producing more of one output without producing less of another. In the graph above, points B, C, D, and F are all productively efficient. But if we had points wherever this is pointing right here, let's call that point R. Since it is not on the production possibilities frontier, you could be producing more of either healthcare or education, or even both, without producing less of the other good. So allocative efficiency just means that you are producing the combination of outputs which are most desired by society. All of the productively efficient points could be allocatively efficient, but only one of those points actually will be allocatively efficient. To know which point it is, A, B, C, D, or F, we would need to know something about the preferences of that society, which aren't given on a PPF. So just remember, there are those two types of efficiency. We can tell what points are productively efficient given a PPF, but we can't tell which points are allocatively efficient. So as we alluded to in the previous video, the law of diminishing marginal returns is different from the law of diminishing marginal utility. Remember, utility means happiness and individuals are happy, whereas returns refers to production, return refers to profit, and corporations and producers have returns to production. So law of diminishing marginal returns refers to production decisions. And the law of diminishing marginal returns just means that the production of one good becomes less efficient the more you are allocating resources to the production of the good at the expense of another good. In the previous example, you are most efficient at producing healthcare when you were previously producing no healthcare, and you are least efficient at producing healthcare when you are producing the last unit of healthcare. At every point between those two, you are becoming less efficient at producing healthcare, and the opportunity cost of producing healthcare, meaning how much education you are giving up, increases. My favorite in-class exercise to demonstrate this concept is that of stapling paper. If we imagine that I am tasking the class to most efficiently take a stack of unsorted papers, each labeled with a number from 1 to 5, sort them into packets with one of each number and in order, and staple them together, then the class, and if the class only has one stapler, if we add 1 unit of labor, meaning 1 student to the stapler, then we can measure efficiency by the number of packets which can be stapled in a minute. Then this first student is clearly more efficient than having 0 students, since a stapler alone isn't going to produce any packets of stapled paper. And that 1 student may be able to staple 3 packets of 5 sheets of paper in order in a single minute. However, if we add a second student, maybe they can sort through the papers, make packets, while the first student with the stapler staples the packets. The second student is probably even more efficient than the first student, and maybe they can staple 7 packets in a minute instead of 3. If we add a third student who is sorting packets as well and is able to hand the student with the stapler a new packet when the second student is sorting through the original stack, then this third student is really helpful as well, and maybe now we can staple 12 packets in a minute. However, there will eventually be a point where adding another student is not more efficient than the student before them. Perhaps the class can only staple 16 packets when there are 4 students involved with this task. Then the point of diminishing marginal returns kicks in with that 4th student. There may even come a point where the marginal returns are negative. Maybe adding 40 students into a small classroom makes it too congested, and it actually decreases the number of packets which could be stapled. Then the marginal returns for the 40th student are negative. However, you should know that the difference between diminishing marginal returns and negative marginal returns they're completely different things. So make sure that you know when the incremental return is decreasing versus when it is negative. Now, to better explain this concept and also to think about the importance of the division of labor, we can think of Adam Smith's pin-making example from the text. So though Adam Smith is often categorized as the father of economics due to a text he wrote in the 18th century, The actual title of the father of economics, it should probably be attributed to Ibn Khaldun, who was an Arabic scholar of different fields centuries before Adam Smith first wrote his Wealth of Nations text. And so this is an overlooked and marginalized figure in the history of economics. But if you were interested in learning about an Arabic predecessor to Adam Smith, then I would recommend researching Ibn Khaldun. But while Adam Smith may not have been the founder of economics, still incredibly influential in disseminating the knowledge of the economic perspective and accurately describe many of the principles and concepts which we discussed in this class. One of those examples which he used to illustrate his points was that of the production of a pin. So just think of a safety pin that you would put on like a baby diaper or something without the safety part. So just a straight needle with a ball on one end and a point on the other. Adam Smith identified over 18 separate tasks which were required to produce one pin. If we apply the law of diminishing marginal returns to this example, we can see that each additional worker probably brings at least as much value as the previous worker when it comes to producing a single pin. But if there's only enough machinery or capital to produce one pin at a time, then the 19th worker would be less productive than the 18th worker, and the point of diminishing marginal returns would kick in. Next, we'll see how Smith's example of the pin factory illustrates his point about the division of labor. So when we refer to the division of labor, we are referring to specialization and only allowing each worker to work on one particular task or one particular part of the production process. The incredible efficiency gains produced by this process are demonstrated in this last bullet point about pin production at a pin factory, in which it's noted that in Smith's example, one worker could spend all day performing all 18 tasks of making a pin and only make 20 pins in a workday. But if you allowed 10 separate workers to divide the labor and each specialize and focus on a particular task, then those 10 workers could make 48,000 pins a day. That is an incredible efficiency gain, which we are able to realize by relying on the division of labor and of specialization. And this is a central feature of capitalism. It's in every industry, from hospitals to restaurants to factories, and it's what allows us to more efficiently achieve our stated goals that we are trying to maximize subject to our budget constraints. So tying together the lessons in this video with some of the lessons from our previous videos, we can begin to see the shape of the model of comparative advantage. And we can think about the roots of the benefits of division in labor and the importance of trade. Now, the first 3 bullet points illustrate the 3 reasons why the division of labor, according to specialization, lead to greater efficiency. The last bullet point highlights the importance of capitalism or market-based systems of economic activity for encouraging specialization. Why are markets required for specialization? Because humans have a variety of needs, and if they only produce one of them, for example, if you specialized in agriculture and you only focused your labor on growing corn, then you would be unable to fulfill your other needs, such as housing. And so you have to be able to trade some of the goods in which you specialize for the goods that others make. For example, trading some of the corn that you make for rent, for housing, or for the manufacturing of residential structure. So trade allows for specialization, and as we'll see on the next slide, on the next video, specialization improves trade, makes trade more efficient. And so with all of this in mind, we can officially introduce the model of comparative advantage.